Bears finished last in yards per play, last in points per game after Week 8. New head coach Ben Johnson was hired away from Detroit to help resolve that. OTAs got underway yesterday for Chicago with year 2 on the horizon for number 1 pick Caleb Williams. Coach talked about starting off on the right foot, with his QB today.
It starts with developing a rapport and a trust, and that's earned over time. You don't walk in day one and expect that to be achieved. And so the more time we spend together, he understands that I have his best interests at heart, and vice versa. He's going to go out there and play as well as he possibly can, not just for himself or me, but for the whole team and the city.
Bears reporter Courtney Cronin was there today. Courtney, you've been there for a few years and a few different head coaches. What did you see today that showed signs of change in this Ben Johnson regime?
Well, Phil, before we even get to any of the football that we saw at day 2 of OTAs, it was what Ben Johnson said at the podium, getting out in front of the story that's been the centerpiece of the Bears organization for the last week. The information that came out in Seth Wickersham's book regarding Caleb Williams and the pre-draft process. And Johnson got out in front of it and said that he talked to his quarterback last week. He felt it needed to be addressed, but that Williams is his own man, is going to be treated as such. And there were a couple of questions that came up about the feelings that Williams had about the organization previously, what happened last year. Obviously, Johnson cannot speak to that specifically, but said in the 4 months that he's worked with Williams, he has been, quote, outstanding. And after a couple more questions, he was asked the obvious one, the big elephant in the room, the feeling from Carl Williams, Caleb's father, that Chicago is where quarterbacks go to die. And this was the eye-opening moment for me today, hearing Ben Johnson responding to that, saying, quote, I love it. He wants the opportunity to change that narrative in 2025. He believes that that is where, quote, great journeys will begin. Now, as Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson begin their rapport, remember, it is only day 2 of OTAs. There were a couple of mistakes on the field today, and I go back to a conversation I had with Jalen Johnson last month about this increased accountability that these players are hoping to see on the field. And I said, what does that look like in 2025? He told me point blank, if you see it, call it out. That is exactly what happened from Ben Johnson today at OTAs. There was a moment during 7-on-7 where veteran tight end Cole Kmet was not lined up properly, and Johnson had no issue letting him know. Even the veterans are not immune from getting yelled at from time to time, that he needed to be in the right place. It's only day 2 of the install, and Johnson has reiterated time and again he expects there to be mistakes on the field. Right now is when they should be making them, but there are too many pre-snap penalties, some mental lapses that Johnson felt he needed to call out right in the moment. So as they get on the field tomorrow for the final day of OTAs this week, those things can be corrected.
Day 2 of the install, year 2 with Caleb Williams, and Ben Johnson knows all too well, coming from Detroit, how challenging that division is going to be in 2025. Courtney Cronin, thanks so much. Well, the Bears addressed major needs this offseason after going 5-11, an 11th losing season in the last 12 years. They brought in Ben Johnson. The O-line allowed league high in sacks, so they got guards Joe Thuney and Jonah Jackson, as well as center Drew Dahlman. And then they got Caleb Williams, some more weapons in the draft, taking tight end Colston Loveland and wide receiver Luther Burden with their first 2 picks. Back here with Dan Graziano, Booger McFarland, and Louis Riddick. And Graz, last week, we heard these stories come out. Courtney mentioned them as well about Williams not wanting to go to Chicago before ultimately deciding that maybe he's the guy to turn this franchise around. What is a realistic ceiling for Caleb and the Bears in 2025?
I think, Phil, if they can get to around 500 and show progress as the year goes on, that would have to be considered a successful season. People want to talk about playoffs. I just feel like that's a little unrealistic given their division, the strength of the other 3 teams, all of whom made the postseason last year, and given the fact that Ben Johnson is a first-time head coach. Caleb Williams is still a young, developing quarterback. And when you listen to Ben Johnson talk and you hear Courtney Cronin talk about the things he has said since he got there, he's talking about building something. He is not talking about putting the finishing touches on something. That's down the road. Right now, they're out there, they're making mistakes, they're figuring out what they need to work on, and that's a process that could take a little while and might bleed into the season, honestly. So it's about how quickly it comes together. I think this year is going to be about building towards something for the Bears in the future.
Look, there's some high-level players on this football team. No doubt. Let's just start there. There's some high-level players at some really key positions. They revamped this football team inside out, starting on the offensive line, the center and the 2 guards. They go in the draft and they get 2 just absolute studs in Colston Loveland, Luther Burden to go along with Roma Dunze, DJ Moore. That's ridiculous right there. I mean, that's a lot of weapons right there for a young quarterback to work with. Obviously, the centerpiece is Caleb. And really now it's about going from what sounds like, by all accounts, incompetency surrounding him in terms of the people who were leading him and directing him as to how to study to be a quarterback, how to play quarterback, how to call plays for a quarterback, of his skill level, and then how to correct him and help him continue to develop. He didn't have any of that last year. Now he has a guy that last year during 2024, we spent nothing but hour after hour just absolutely raving about Ben Johnson's creativity, his ability to take Jared Goff's game to a whole nother level, and the fact that he was going to be a slam dunk head coach in 2025. Well, now here it is, right? And we've seen teams go worse to first before. I'm not saying they're going to go worse to first because I agree with Graz. This is a very tough division, very tough. And we haven't even talked about the defense. Dennis Allen is a hell of a defensive coordinator. If you ever talk to him about defense, he knows his stuff. So this football team should be much, much, much improved. They're just in the heck of a division.
So here's what I want to say about Caleb Williams, and I wasn't in that building and inside those meeting rooms, but when we talk about a pressure standpoint and how much pressure is on him, think about this. He's come out and said that the staff was incompetent in preparing him how to play and read defenses, blah, blah, blah. Well, when you say that, I think everyone that works in the NFL has Ben Johnson in high regard. And so now all the incompetency that you said you got last year, that is gone. And so if we're going to believe you and take your word for it, and I don't know if I'm willing to do that because I hadn't heard the other side, and I'm not going to disrespect all the coaches from the Bears that were there last year, but if you're going to come out and be on record and said that those people that prepared you were incompetent, then you better come out and play a hell of a lot better this year. And I agree with you, Lewis. It's a ton of talent on that team. They've surrounded him with an offensive line. Everybody said that the Bears' offensive line couldn't protect. They went out and they did that. Well, what about the weapons? You got Luther Burden and Roma Dunze. You got weapons on the outside. You got running backs. The only piece left is the quarterback. And you said you didn't get coaching last year, so let's go get the best offensive mind that we can, and they did that in Ben Johnson. So now, Caleb, what are the excuses? It's kind of like what Antonio Tarver asked Roy Jones years ago. Roy, what you going to say now? What's going to be your excuse now? There are no more excuses. Caleb Williams has to show up and not only play, guys, he's got to play at a high level. I think that's the only expectation that I would have if I was a Bears fan. And I think if you're in the Bears organization, that's what you better expect from him.
And also, in a way, kind of comparison, being the thief of joy, the other rookie QBs, Drake May, his promise, Bo Nix getting the Broncos back to the playoffs, gee whiz, Jayden Daniels, all that he did in Washington, Caleb Williams now with all the pieces around him, the pressure's compounded in Chicago for 2025. Still to come, Jason Kelce went to the owners' meetings, spearheading the defense of the tush-push. Stick around to hear what the longtime center had to say about the NFL's most disputed play. That's next.
Chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại